My business partner had been draining our company in secret for 4 years, transferring millions to ghost accounts in his name. And when I discovered it, he tried to blame me to the authorities. But he didn't know I was a forensic accountant and had every single transaction documented from day one. There's a kind of betrayal that comes without obvious signs. No shouting, no arguments, no moments of tension that in retrospect you can point to and say there. That is where it all started. It is the betrayal that is built in silence, with patience, with the meticulousness of someone who knows exactly what they are doing and has calculated that they will never be discovered. That is the coldest betrayal, and most costly. Mine arrived on an ordinary Monday, in a routine review I do at the start of every month, looking at numbers that should have added up and that had not been adding up for a while, though I had not seen it yet, because the person who had manipulated them knew exactly how to make them appear correct to a quick glance. The problem for him was that I never looked quickly. My name is Mariana. I am 41 years old. I am a certified public accountant with a specialization in forensic auditing, which is the discipline that deals with examining financial records with the objective of detecting fraud, irregularities, or intentional manipulation of accounting information. It is a job that requires a combination of deep technical knowledge and a kind of structured skepticism, the ability to look at a number that appears correct and ask yourself regardless whether it is correct and why. I have been practicing that specialty for 15 years. I have worked on corporate fraud cases, business litigation, embezzlement investigations. I have seen sophisticated schemes and clumsy schemes and everything that exists across the spectrum between those two extremes. What I had not seen until that Monday was a scheme designed specifically to operate inside a company that I co-founded, built, and ran for 6 years alongside someone I trusted completely. The company is called Meridian Consulting. Rodrigo Castellanos and I founded it 6 years ago, after 5 years working together at a large auditing firm, where we had both been senior managers and where we had developed a way of working as a team that seemed complementary and efficient. Rodrigo was the commercial face of the company, charismatic, good with clients, with a network of contacts that in the early years was fundamental for securing the contracts that allowed us to grow. I was the technical and operational side, the processes, the methodology, the quality of the work we delivered, the internal financial structure. It was a division that worked. Or so I believed for 6 years. What I did not see, or what I did not want to see, was that that division also meant Rodrigo had access to the external face of the company, to clients, and to certain operational accounts, without the technical oversight I applied to everything else. That zone of access, without supervision, was what he used. The first number that did not add up was small. It was a difference of just over 3,000 pesos between what the bank statement showed as an outgoing transaction and what the internal accounting system recorded as an expense on that date. 3,000 pesos in a company that billed several million a year is statistically insignificant. It is the kind of difference that most accountants would attribute to a data entry error, an unrecorded bank fee, any one of the dozens of minor explanations that exist for small discrepancies. But I do not work with majorities. I work with certainties. I search for the specific transaction in the banking system. It was a transfer to an account I did not recognize as a vendor or operational expense of the company. I searched the account number in our vendor records. It did not exist. I searched the account number in available public records. It was an account in the name of a company called Castellanos RG Services, registered approximately 4 years earlier. Castellanos, my partner's last name. That night, I did not sleep. Not because I had panicked, though there was something very close to panic moving through my chest in a way I had to actively control. But because the moment I saw that name, something in me switched modes automatically like a switch that activates on its own, and I went from being Rodrigo's partner to being the forensic auditor assigned to investigate Rodrigo. Those two roles cannot coexist. When the second activates, the first disappears. I sat in front of my computer and started from the beginning. I built a complete financial timeline for the previous 4 years. Every transaction, every outgoing payment, every transfer, every vendor payment, cross-referencing the internal accounting system with bank statements with available supporting documentation. What emerged over the following 6 hours was an image that became sharper and more serious as the data organized itself. The transfers to Castellanos RG Services were not unique. There were other accounts, other ghost companies, other names, all with a traceable connection to Rodrigo if you knew where to look, and I knew where to look. The pattern was sophisticated. The transfers were never of round amounts that might attract attention in a quick review. They were never too frequent. They were distributed in a way that simulated normal operational expenses in categories I reviewed less frequently because historically they had been stable. It was the work of someone who knew the company's accounting structure well. He knew it because I had taught it to him myself. When I finished building the initial map, it was 4 a.m. The total amount I could trace in that first review, only from the transactions I could directly link to the accounts I had identified that night, was an amount representing approximately 22% of everything the company had billed over 4 years. 22%. For years. I sat looking at the number for a long time. Then I saved everything to an external drive that was not at the office but at my house, closed the programs, turned off the computer, and went to sit in the living room armchair and wait for dawn. I did not call Rodrigo. I did not send him a message. I made no move that would indicate to him that anything had changed. Because at that point I knew one thing with absolute clarity. What I had was enough to start an investigation, but it was not enough to finish one. And I needed to finish it before making any move. The following 3 months were the strangest of my professional life. I kept going to the office every day. I kept having meetings with Rodrigo. I kept talking with him about clients and projects and next quarter strategy with the normalness of someone who knows nothing. And in parallel, every night, I kept building the case. I obtained access to public records of the ghost companies. I traced the flows of the transfers through the bank statements I had legal access to review as a partner. I identified the timing patterns, the amounts, the frequencies, the accounting categories Rodrigo had used to camouflage each outgoing payment. And I found something else I had not expected to find. Rodrigo had been preparing an exit. In the previous 8 months, the transfers had increased in frequency and amount. The records of the ghost companies showed movements suggesting the money was being consolidated and moved toward accounts in another country. And there were internal documents that Rodrigo had modified in the system, subtle changes to historical records that, had I not had the original versions backed up in my own files, would have altered the accounting narrative of the company in a way that implicated me. He was not only stealing from me, he was preparing to leave and let me carry a financial disaster that in the modified books would appear to be my responsibility. I called my attorney on a Thursday morning. Attorney Carmen Vidal has been my corporate attorney for 14 years, and I know her well enough to know that when I present her with solid documentation, I do not need to convince her of anything. I just need to show her the numbers. I showed her the numbers. She listened to me for 1 hour. She reviewed the documentation I brought in silence, with the concentration of someone who is evaluating not only what she sees, but the implications of what she sees. At the end, she told me we had an exceptionally well-documented case for several simultaneous actions: a criminal complaint for fraud and embezzlement, a civil action to recover the diverted assets, and a request for precautionary measures to freeze the identified accounts before Rodrigo could complete the movement of funds abroad that I had detected. She told me speed was critical, that if Rodrigo managed to move the money outside the jurisdiction, recovery would become significantly more complex. I told her I was ready to proceed immediately. What followed occurred over a period of 72 hours that I will describe as clearly as possible. Thursday afternoon, my attorney filed the request for precautionary measures before the competent court. With the documentation I had built over 3 months, the judge granted the measures that same afternoon: freezing of the identified accounts and a travel ban for Rodrigo while the complaint was being investigated. Friday morning, the criminal complaint was filed with the prosecutor's office specializing in economic crimes. Friday afternoon, Rodrigo received notification of the precautionary measures. He called me 2 hours later. The conversation was brief. He told me I had made a serious mistake, that he had documentation proving that the financial irregularities in the company were my responsibility, that if I did not withdraw the complaint, he would present that documentation to the authorities and I would be the one facing legal consequences. I told him I was looking forward to seeing that documentation with great interest. That I was looking forward to it because I knew exactly what it was: the modified versions of the historical records he had altered in the system over the previous months. The versions I had in their original forms, with their creation metadata and modification histories that showed with precision when they had been altered and from which system user. There was a long silence. I hung up. The legal process lasted 16 months. The evidence of accounting record alteration was one of the most important elements of the case because it transformed the fraud complaint into something with an additional dimension. Not only was there embezzlement, but an active attempt to manipulate the evidence to incriminate a third party, which was me. That element elevated the seriousness of the case significantly. Rodrigo was found guilty of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of accounting records. The sentence included effective imprisonment, the first in all the stories I have told in this space, where the result was real prison time without suspension, because the combination of the three offenses and the premeditation demonstrated by the attempt to incriminate me exceeded the threshold that allowed conditional suspension. Asset recovery was partial. A portion of the money had been moved before the precautionary measures became effective. But the portion that was recovered, combined with the value of Rodrigo's equity stake that was liquidated as part of the process, allowed me to stabilize the company and continue operating. Meridian Consulting still exists. Without Rodrigo, smaller than at its best moment, but completely mine. With clients who stayed when they learned what had happened because the technical reputation of the company had always been mine. There is something I learned from all of this that goes beyond the obvious lesson about trust and business partners. I learned it looking at the modified records Rodrigo had prepared to incriminate me. Looking at the sophistication with which he had constructed an alternative narrative using my own systems and my own processes. What I learned is that people who plan to harm you study how you work. They study your processes. They study your blind spots. And they build their plans around those blind spots. The only real protection against that is not generalized distrust, which paralyzes and poisons working relationships. The real protection is having control systems that do not depend on anyone's trust, processes that verify themselves, records that back up automatically, audits that happen by design and not by suspicion. In my company, those systems now exist explicitly and in documented form. Not because I distrust the people I work with, but because I learned that trust and controls are not opposites. They're complementary. Controls do not say you distrust. They say that the work we do together is valuable enough to protect structurally. That lesson cost me 4 years and a betrayal that still hurts when I think about it. But I learned it, and I will not forget it. If this story made you clench your teeth, comment. Would you trust a business partner blindly, or would you have control from the start? Like if you believe protecting your company is not distrust but intelligence. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who has a business partner and needs to review their financial controls. Practical tip: if you have a company with partners, implement cross-referencing financial controls from the start. No partner should have exclusive, unsupervised access to accounts or records. Automatic backups of accounting records with preserved metadata are your best protection against manipulation. Internal auditing is not distrust. It is professionalism.